Kaltenborn speaking.
This is Elmer Davis again.
There's good news tonight after all.
Classic broadcast microphones from the golden age of radio. We'll be looking at microphones in use in broadcasting from 1930 until about 1950. And we'll be using them so you'll be able to hear how they sound. We begin with the 618 Western Electric dynamic microphone, an important mic in broadcasting because it was the first practical dynamic mic to be used in radio. And its design, both inside and out, were copied by many other manufacturers. The microphone had an edge-wound aluminum coil, producing about 30 ohms at the output terminals of the microphone itself, requiring no output transformer. It had a special plug in the back, manufactured as a proprietary item by Western Electric, and used for no other purpose that I know of but with this microphone. These mics could be seen in pictures of Franklin Roosevelt as he delivered his fireside chats. You may remember seeing him at a desk with a number of mics that looked like this, but if you look carefully, you'll see that these, the Western Electric mics, would have flags or signs above them that would say Columbia or Mutual, but never NBC. The reason was that NBC was a subsidiary of RCA and used only RCA equipment. Now, these mics were good for close talking because they did not have the proximity effect, that is, the effect of lifting the bass, as do many ribbon mics and cardioid mics. As a matter of fact, you will notice, I'll get close to it, and I don't think you will notice that the bass goes up considerably. Except I'm not talking quite as loud, but except as the room changes, of course, the acoustics will, but it doesn't have that booming effect that ribbon mics have under the same circumstances. This is the Western Electric Acoustic Impedance Element D99098. The 618 had the distinction of being one of the first microphones to be used in a highly directional manner so that performances such as the opera could be broadcast with the operator picking up the singers and actors on the stage. This acoustical element from Bell Telephone Laboratories was the precursor of what is now known as a shotgun microphone. The microphone was attached to it in such a way that the entire unit could be mounted on a cameraman's tripod. And the tripod, of course, had a movable racking arrangement so that the operator could point this array at the stage, an opera singer, for example, who might be walking across the stage, and follow him as he moved. Usually a sighting scope was attached to the stack, and the operator always wore earphones so that he could hear what was going on. The microphone was designed by Bell Laboratories and has an inside design that was copied, as well as the outside design, by many other makers of microphones. The design within had a special tube and air chamber arranged so that the air pressure from the front to the back of the diaphragm was equalized. Many networks replaced the connector with their own standard Canon or other normal standard connector. This microphone was used also in the motion picture industry and had a long life from 1930 until about 1950, although it was not manufactured after about 1937. This is the Western Electric 618 dynamic microphone. Now we're looking at the RCA inductor model 50A. Notice how similar it looks to the 618 Western Electric in shape. Inside, however, the mechanism was somewhat different. Being an inductor microphone, it has a diaphragm with a V groove and a one-turn wire impregnated in it. That wire is connected to a transformer to raise the impedance to 250 ohms and to increase the voltage. It was rugged and could be used anywhere the 618 could be used, outside as well as in the studio. Its response was somewhat limited compared to the 618, and we'll demonstrate that the best we can right now. You've heard this 50A inductor, and now we'll go back for a moment to the 618 Western Electric Dynamic. Now we're using the 618 dynamic microphone, about the same level. This, remember, is a 30 ohm mic with no transformer in the line. testing on the 618 Western Electric, now once more for comparison, the 50A RCA. And this is the RCA 50A, an inductor microphone, probably the only one that I know of released by RCA during this time period. This mic had a shorter life than did the 618. It was only manufactured from about 1933 or 4 until about 1937, and not many exist today. This was RCA's 50A inductor microphone. In 1935, Western Electric introduced the 630A dynamic microphone. It was intended to be a replacement or at least an improvement over the 618. This microphone was the result of research by Bell Telephone Laboratories, and they had determined that a spherical shape was the ideal form for a microphone. The microphone had, in addition to being spherical, a screen across the top. We would call it now a spit filter, to protect the diaphragm and to protect it from pops to some degree. The microphone had an aluminum winding, just as did the 618, edge wound, produced 30 ohms at the terminal of the microphone. The normal way in which this mic was used was with the diaphragm parallel to the ceiling, and this made it possible to receive sound from all directions. So a chorus, a set of actors, several announcers could be grouped around the entire microphone. Now this microphone had, as did the 618, an acoustical path within to relieve the pressure within the microphone itself. By pressure I mean the air pressure inside the cavity. So it had a tube and an air passage which exited at the very bottom. This mic was used not only in radio, universally, but also in the motion picture industry. It worked very well as a boom mic, and some studios used it for voice mics as well. As an example, Fleischer Studios, who did Popeye and Betty Boop, used this for their soundtracks. Mae Kestel, who was the voice of Betty Boop and Olive Oil, tells a story that when Jack Mercer, who was the voice of Popeye, was overseas during the war, she dubbed the voice of Popeye using this microphone. Hard to believe, a very versatile actress, a very versatile microphone. Studios all over use these inside and out, some of them universally as their only microphone. In fact, in Oakland, California, KLX, the Tribune station, used these microphones for announcing as well as music, and they did 2 musical programs every day. So this is the famous 8-ball, and we'll hear some other microphones with nicknames as well. The 633 by Western Electric was intended to be a replacement for the 630. Did the 630 need to be replaced? Well, probably not. But by about 1939 or 40, Western Electric commissioned a group of design engineers to redesign the appearance of all their equipment. Until then, transmitters, consoles, and microphones had been dull or black and did not compete well with the RCA Art Moderne series. So Henry Dreyfuss headed a group of people who redesigned all of these items, and the 633 was one of the results. It was called a salt shaker, and it looked something like a salt shaker, and it also was a lot more modern in color as well. They no longer used black. These were a metallic gray, as was the console and the transmitters that they were selling at the time. This is a unidirectional microphone, actually omnidirectional mostly, except when you use a baffle when it becomes more of a unidirectional mic. Now you see these microphones today, but you very seldom see the baffles. This is an 8B baffle and pretty short supply at the moment, but I want to show you how it works. On the top of the microphone are 3 vanes, and the baffle is machined in such a way that these slots fit the vanes. There is a ring in the baffle which causes 3 cork pads to be forced against the microphone, keeping the baffle in place. It does have an effect on the direction, and we're going to put it on now so that you can see how it works. And you'll hear how it works, too. Excuse the noise. Now we're operating the same microphone with the 8B baffle. These mics were used a great deal, and probably more of these were made than any other of the dynamic microphones by Western Electric. In fact, this was the last series of dynamic mics to be made by Western Electric, because soon after they came into manufacture, Western Electric was forced out of the sound and broadcast business by the government under their antitrust laws. As you know, Western Electric was an arm of Bell Telephone Laboratories, or vice versa, and they supplied telephone equipment as well. These mics you would see in all kinds of installations as well as broadcasting public address. The United Nations building in the early 1950s used hundreds of these, a mic at each place of each diplomat. The 633 was a dynamic mic, as we said, with a 32 ohm output, still without any output transformer. When Western Electric was forced to give up the line of sound equipment, Altic Lansing took over the manufacture and distribution of this model of microphone. They continued to produce the 633A, which is as you see it here, but they also produced a 633C, which had an output transformer, giving for the first time to the dynamic microphones a 50, 150, and 250 ohm output. This, however, is the original Western Electric 633. Now we come to another dynamic microphone, this time without a nickname. This is the RCA 88A. It was intended to be in competition to the salt shaker that we just saw. It was a dynamic microphone, and its inner workings were very much the same as the Western Electric dynamic mics. It too had an edge-wound coil. However, it had a transformer, as the others did not. So this microphone made three impedances available: 50, 150, and 250 ohms. It also had a ball joint swivel at the base. And like all the RCA microphones, it had a half-inch pipe thread. The microphone was used a great deal in remotes by NBC for their programs, even including music. And it was rated from 60 to 10 kilohertz in frequency response. It was a very good overall microphone and even pretty good for announcing, so it was sometimes used in the studios as an additional mic or an auxiliary. It was fairly good from a pop standpoint. You could get pretty close without much problem, and it had a very good pickup. It was normally omnidirectional. I should tell you also that it came in black and chrome originally, and then what is called umber gray and brush chrome. Their umber gray always looked brown to me and to everyone else, but it's called umber gray, and this is an example that we see of umber gray. It was used in early television because it was small and could be mounted close to the desk, didn't obscure the performer. In my case, it would have been better if it did. But anyway, this is the 88A RCA. We are now looking at and using the RCA BK1A. This dynamic microphone was intended to replace the 88A, and its characteristics were quite similar. Its construction was similar, too, to the other dynamic microphones that we've examined. It had an edge-wound aluminum coil. It had a transformer in its base, providing 50, 150, or 250 ohms. The microphone also had an equalizing tube within to equalize the pressure, and the exit of the air was at the top of the tube near the screen that you can't see on the microphone itself. These mics were supplied in umber gray. Now, to me, umber gray, as we said earlier, looks more like brown, but television was with us, and these were essentially non-reflective devices, so they could be used without that problem. And they were. Now, RCA called them the commentator, not the ice cream cone, because you could put 3 or 4 of these together in front of several experts and not obscure the picture. The microphone could be easily removed from the stand, and since we're not worried about noises here, I'm going to take the microphone off the stand so you can see how that was done. Now, in this setup, we could use the mic very easily. It fit the hand excellently, so we could use it for interviews, man on the street, that kind of thing. And the fitting at the base of the mic was a standard half-inch pipe thread, which would fit into a standard RCA program stand. The BK1A ice cream cone by RCA. When we think of the classic microphone, most of us think of the RCA 44 series of ribbon microphones, the classic shape and style of the 30s and 40s. This is a ribbon microphone, and I'm using one of the very early models, the one on my left and on your right, which is a PB90. It's very similar to the 44A, which was the first of the 44 series. It had one single magnet instead of two. It had an A-frame to support the ribbon, and the ribbon was a duraluminum ribbon of 1/10 mil thickness and less than 1/4 of an inch wide. The ribbon, being a very low impedance, of course, required a transformer. The transformer is in the base of this unit. This being a bidirectional microphone, it can be used equally well from either side, this side or this side, and is usually drawn as a figure 8 pattern. These microphones were used in drama, in general studio work, but not outside. They were not suitable where wind and noise was a problem. As a matter of fact, people worked farther away from microphones in those days, and they would use as many as 6 or 7 actors grouped about a microphone of this sort. It was not normal to talk into a microphone close where your lips were touching, and certainly we didn't have rock music. If you were to try to use one of these in a rock band, it would probably last maybe halfway through one track. This is the PB90, and it has the single magnet, as we said, and we will now go to a newer microphone of the same family. Now we are using a 44BX. In the case of the PB90, we had only one set of magnets at the bottom, and the latest of the 44 series, the 44BX, had a magnet structure at the top and the bottom. This is probably the epitome of all the classic microphones. This mic is set in the music position, and I'll explain what that means. As you look through a port in the base of the mic, you will see either a V or an M, the M meaning music, the V is for voice. The voice position allowed an inductor to be connected across the output of the transformer, and this caused a low-frequency roll-off, which made it possible to use the microphone at a closer distance. Without doing that, you get a tremendous, what we call proximity effect, which means a bass boost. And some people use that to advantage. Certainly the people in drama did. In fact, I'm going to demonstrate that now by getting very close, and you will see how bassy it becomes. I'll drop my voice down a bit and get closer to the microphone, and it should be very boomy now. They said with these microphones that a ribbon mic, if Mickey Mouse used one, he could sound like Basil Ruysdael or Orson Welles. Well, maybe that's not true, but there's something to be said for it. Now I have moved over to another 44BX. This microphone is strapped, that is connected in the base on the V1 or voice position, which causes a roll-off on the bass. It should not be as boomy as the microphone just heard. The 44BX was originally introduced in black and chrome, but the later models were all in television or umber gray in this case, and a brush chrome, less reflective, and they were used for motion picture work as well. Some of the microphones were produced without any chrome at all, brush or otherwise, in a dull finish, and we'll look at one of those now. This mic, I was taken back by old alma mater there, but this mic is a non-reflective mic used primarily for motion picture use. It could be suspended from a boom, and this mic had some ears, we call them, on the yoke fitting for support so that it could be supported by an elastic device from a boom. These mics were very sensitive to touching, and remember they used to say, don't touch the microphone. Well, there was certainly a good reason for that, and you can see why. I guess we shouldn't have to say you should never blow into any microphone, but particularly into a ribbon mic. You very likely will destroy the ribbon if you do so. So bear that in mind. I'm going to go back to the table here. These microphones could be supplied, as were supplied, at 250 ohms with a provision for either 50 or 150 or 250 ohm output. This would be a good place to tell you that it was necessary in those days, and necessary now if you're to use these classic microphones, to have a board that has at least 100 decibels of gain from microphone to line output. Reason being, the microphone level itself is not great, and if you're going to simulate its original use, people would be working a good distance from the mic, not as they do now. RCA recommended that their ribbon microphones be fed to a mixer or amplifier having an unloaded input. By that they meant that the input transformers, secondary, should be unloaded and supplied only to the grid of the tube being the only loading. So you've seen the RCA 44BX, certainly the microphone we all think of when we think of microphones from the classic period of radio. This is the 74B, called the Junior Velocity, and it was a younger member, smaller member of the RCA 44 family. You'll notice it had a similar shape, but it's smaller, it's scaled down in every way. The pole piece system was simpler than that in the 44BX. It had the pole piece arranged in such a way that the magnet itself was the pole piece. The ribbon, however, was exactly the same part number. Again, a duraluminum ribbon of 1/10 mil thickness and approximately less than 1/4 of an inch wide. The microphone was bidirectional, as was the 44. It had no provision for bass roll-off, could be used as the 44 on either side. They were important mics in broadcasting in the 40s because they were very inexpensive, and they were used not only in talkback and control room work, but also in the studios. They were pretty good, and they cost about 1/5 the cost of a 44BX. These mics were important in broadcasting. They were used not only in control rooms for talkback, but also for program use. They were used for announcing, not as much for music, but had a very good response, somewhat limited in response to or in comparison to the 44 series. And they were very attractive. This mic, you will remember, was used in television productions such as Laugh-In. You would see it when Gary Owens would cup his hand over his ear and pretend to be a newscaster. The first of the series was issued in shiny chrome and shiny black. The last of the manufactured series of 74Bs, or Junior Velocities, was in umber gray, which to me still looks like brown. This is the 74B, the Junior Velocity ribbon microphone from RCA. The Western Electric 639 was a unique microphone in that it was really two microphones in one case. It had a ribbon section, much like the 44 of RCA, and a dynamic unit in the base, such as the 633 had. By combining the two through a transformer, it was possible to cancel off-axis sounds, so that it was live in the front and essentially dead in the back. In this position, it was a cardioid microphone. By switching to the ribbon alone, it became a bidirectional mic, again like the RCA 44, and could be used from either side. The dynamic unit was a dynamic unit only in the base, and it was more or less non-directional in that position. The mic was not particularly attractive from a photogenic standpoint and was often called the birdcage, another nickname. The mic had no provision for bass roll-off, and announcers, many of them, loved the proximity effect. So they would get close to the microphone and say, "Now this is your obedient servant," and that sort of thing. So they liked this microphone, especially Edward R. Murrow enjoyed the use of the mic a lot. You would see it on I See It or Hear It Now, and you also could see the microphone in photos of the March of Time, where it was used in the ribbon position with as many as 7 or 8 actors grouped about fore and aft. It was also used in The Mysterious Traveler, a mystery show on Mutual. These mics were not used, as you would imagine, on NBC programs, but were frequently seen on Mutual and some of the CBS programs. As in the case of the 633, when Western Electric was forced to cease manufacture of microphones and other audio equipment, Altic Lansing took up the manufacture and release of these mics. They continued with the same number, the 639A, which had 3 positions in the back, to adjust the either dynamic, ribbon, or cardioid position, or the 639B, which had an additional 3 positions, giving a variation of the cardioid pattern. They manufactured the microphone through the 50s, and it still had the transformer. It still was rated as a 30-ohm output microphone. The 639 and 639B from Western Electric, this is an original Western, and later by Altec Lansing. In 1950, RCA introduced the KB2C, a bantam velocity microphone. It was very similar in operation to the large velocity mics such as the 44 and the 74B, but as you can see, it was scaled down. It was bidirectional, and it was very easy to use as an interviewer mic because the announcer did not have to move the mic back and forth. He could stay on one side and the person being interviewed on the other. The microphone had 3 impedances available and had on the side a bass cut switch, which we'll demonstrate now. Now I'm going to turn the microphone to the music position, in which it will have a richer bass. Now the bass response would be flat. The response on this microphone was 50 to 10 kilohertz. At least that's how it was specified. I think it was a little better, but it was an excellent microphone. It could be used for close talking as well, and of course it could be handheld. All very important elements when you wanted to use a remote microphone. Now we go back to the voice position. Now we'll remove the microphone from the desk stand, and we can use it as a handheld mic, as we said, for interviewers. So you don't have to move the mic back and forth. In addition, it was very directional as far as having a figure-8 pattern. While talking, I will turn the microphone 90 degrees, and you will notice how that works. We're now 90 degrees in incidence, that is angle of incidence, and you will notice that it's way down in level. And now, without doing anything, talking any louder or anything else, we'll simply move it back so that we're on axis. And you can see how directional the microphone is. This mic also had another interesting feature in that the cable could be disconnected at the microphone itself. And we're going to show you now how that little hatch was opened in the handle so that the Canon XL connector could be applied to the microphone. This was a very valuable thing in remotes as well because you could carry all the microphones separately and the cables could be kept in a separate case. As we said, this microphone is very similar in design to the large velocity microphones, except that it's been largely scaled down, if you can say largely. It has 2 magnets on either side of the ribbon, and the magnets form the pole pieces themselves. So there's no extra pole piece. The magnet is the pole piece. In the base of the microphone is the transformer and inductor, and it's strappable for 30, 150, or 250 ohms. RCA usually shipped these microphones at 250 ohms. The microphone was also tiltable, so that it can be tilted slightly to the forward or aft as you wish. Now here's another KB2C, this one originally as it came from the factory. You'll notice that it has the bass, a different bass that was proprietary for this microphone, and one other that was used for talkback purposes. The flag is that of KLX in Oakland, the Tribune station, and this microphone was used a great deal for broadcasting the sports programs from the Oaks ballpark. In fact, Bud Foster used this microphone many, many times, and you would see pictures of the microphone and Bud in press photos of the ball game. So the KB2C was certainly one of the last of the ribbon microphones. There's one other that came later, and we'll show you that. But this was an excellent mic in the later days of ribbon microphones produced by RCA. 1950 was when it was introduced, the KB2C. We come now to another family of attractive microphones by RCA. These are ribbon mics, and the family is that of the 77 series. The first in the 77 series was the 77A, which was larger than the mic you see here, was flat on the bottom instead of rounded, but was unique in that it was really a microphone of two microphones in one. One ribbon was clamped in the center, and both sections were used as individual elements. One of the elements, this being a ribbon, was allowed to operate in a bidirectional manner. The other ribbon was arranged so that it exhausted into a labyrinth network, an acoustical labyrinth network. By combining the two outputs, it was possible to cancel off-axis sounds and produce a unidirectional microphone. It was the first unidirectional ribbon microphone manufactured. Now, in order to change the pattern on the 77A, there was no change, but by the time they got to the second microphone being made, the 77C, which you see here and which I am now using, there was a ring at the bottom, and on that ring was embossed a heart-shaped pattern, which would be cardioid pattern, a round pattern, which would be non-directional, and a ribbon pattern being a bidirectional or figure 8. There was no arrangement to lower the bass on this microphone. You had to use it as it was in that respect. After the 77C, there was a 77D series, and I'll show that in a moment here. We're now talking into the 77D, and this was available as the first microphones were black and chrome. This microphone was available again in the umber gray and brush chrome, so it was not as shiny and didn't have reflective problems. This mic, however, had a variable bass. That is, it had a V1 for voice 1 position, which attenuated the bass to a slight degree, and V2, which was an even greater decline in the bass response, and M for music, which had no bass roll-off at all. In addition, there was a vane in the back. Now, this microphone used an acoustical labyrinth and operated a little differently than did the C or the A or B series. It had a vane system, sort of a vane that was allowed to be moved by means of a movable element in the back. There were 6 patterns available with the D, and of course you had 6 plus the 3 bass positions at the bottom of the microphone. The last in this series was a 77DX, and we are now using the 77DX. Again, this microphone is set in the V1 position. It was very much like the 77D, almost the same, with some design differences. You will notice that the yoke is a little different, and the neural nuts are a larger diameter. Otherwise, it was quite a bit the same. At the same time as the DX was manufactured in this format, they also had a non-reflective umber gray or television gray for boom use, which was dull finish and had no reflective characteristics at all. And that is this microphone that I'm now looking at to my right and to your left. The 77D and DX were held in such acclaim that even now you'll see them on television shows. If you happen to watch Larry King Live or the David Letterman show, you will see a 77DX probably being used as a prop, but nevertheless an attractive microphone and still in the forefront. Another microphone from the golden age of radio. Now we will look at the internals of these classic microphones. Here we see a rear view of the 77C with the top magnet, the upper velocity part of the ribbon, and lower connector tube to the labyrinth. This front view shows the full ribbon with silk only on the upper velocity section and the lower pressure section. This is the clamp between sections. A side view shows the connector tube and magnets. This is the 77C. The 77B was the same microphone without the switch and operated only in the unidirectional cardioid pattern. We now move over to the 77DX. The 77DX shutter is in full open position, providing a bidirectional pattern. Now the shutter is closed to provide a non-directional pattern. Now in the cardioid position. Now in the L3 position. Now in L2 position. Now in the L1 position. And now once again in the fully open position for a bidirectional pattern. Here is a front view of the 77DX. Now we're going to compare the 77DX with the Bantam Velocity. This is the DX, and here is the Bantam Velocity, the KB2C, RCA's Bantam Velocity microphone. Once again, here is the 77DX. We're back again now to the 77DX. Now we're using the 77DX as comparison to a mic we're about to use, which will be RCA's BK5A. I'll switch over from the 77DX to RCA's last effort to make a ribbon microphone. Now we have the BK5A. This is a one-directional, that is unidirectional microphone, very, very directional, and very useful for not only radio, but it was used in television because it could be suspended from a boom and aimed at the actors involved. It perhaps had a little better frequency response than any other ribbon mic made up to date. It had in the back a 3-position voice roll-off position, V1, V2, and music, as did some of the 77s. The BK5A was used, as we said, in motion pictures as well as television, and came in this configuration with a wind screen so that it could be used outside. As we said earlier, most ribbon microphones did not do well outside, but with this arrangement and this design, the BK5A was used in a lot of cowboy movies as well as motion pictures and standard television on the stage. It was a highly directional microphone, and therefore it suited very well to following action on the stage. I'm going to move just a little bit to the side so that you can see how directional it is. I'm over here talking now and talking about the same level, and you probably will barely be able to hear me. Remember how this would be with an omnidirectional microphone. Now I'm back in front of the microphone, and you can see how directional it is. This is the RCA BK5A ribbon. Well, we've seen most of the microphones that were popular during the heyday of radio. Examples shown came from collections by Barry Brosey, Don Lincoln, and me. I'm Bob Morrison.
The world has turned over many times since I took the oath on the plain at West Point, and the hopes and dreams have long since vanished. But I still remember the refrain of one of the most popular barrack ballads of that day, which proclaimed most proudly that old soldiers never die. They just fade away. And like the old soldier of that ballad, I now close my military career and just fade away. An old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. Goodbye.